Great, thank you. Thank you, Ty. I appreciate that. Well, welcome. This is my first virtual conference, so I'm really kind of looking excited to doing it. So I kind of hope it goes well. But thank you for that great intro. And we're going to be doing password cracking. So my background, a little more in depth, that I've been a consultant in cyber and IT for about 25 years. I know I only look like I'm 25 years old. I know that, but it's been doing that for a long time. And I've been teaching for a very long time, over 20 years. And I've taught here in the Washington, D.C. area where I live. I live in Vienna, Virginia. I've taught at Catholic University. I've actually taught at Johns Hopkins, GW. I also teach at a community college in Maryland called Montgomery College too. And I actually got involved in cyber when I was in the military. I was in Navy cryptography. And after that, got a lot of free training, which was pretty cool, but it was great. Helped me establish my career in cyber. Personal, I have a wife from Guatemala and four very attractive and intelligent children. Like I say, they don't take after me. And I'm a member of Seventh-day Adventist Church because, like I say, when you're in cyber, you tend to pray a lot. So I'm going to let Alex introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Alexander Boyarsky. I'm happy. It's an honor for me to be co-presenter and help out Professor Vargas today. I am a rising junior at the George Washington University at the moment. Professor Vargas is actually my professor and will be my professor for a couple more classes. Currently, I do work at Best Buy, Geek Squad Advanced Repair Agent, where I haven't broken anything yet. I'm similar to him. I was a consultant there as well. We have a role where I'm a consultant agent. So I tend to help out with troubleshooting, computer questions. Recently, we became an Apple authorized service provider where we help out people with Mac and iPhone products as well. Currently, I'm on the track to finish my bachelor completion program. I'm majoring in cybersecurity and to come down some of my nerves from time to time when we get stressful exams, and Professor Vargas's hands-on quizzes are on the list there. I play guitar.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. All right, so what are you going to learn in this session? This is really, truly a presentation for newbies. So if you're an advanced user, you may be bored here. So I just want to warn you. I mean, this was designed, when I did this, thinking about maybe folks who are just have to teach cyber for the first time and have to talk about password cracking. But I'm going to basically teach people what the basic structure of a hash password is, especially how it's stored in an operating system. I will be focusing on Linux, by the way. Be familiar with the concept of a password dump. We hear that in the news all the time. There's usually these used password dumps. And because of the way that the media writes about them, I don't think most people have a true understanding what's in a password dump. So I want to go over that. I'll talk about the 5 major methods of attacking passwords today. And then we're going to do a demo hands-on, which Alex is going to lead on how to use hashcat. And the reason is because my hashcat is not working today. I'm not sure. I must have made some kind of change, and I started to crack some passwords this morning and was failing. So Alex is going to step in at that point for me today. Thank you, Alex, by the way, for that. So what are you going to get after the end of this presentation? There's a copy of the PowerPoint, which you have in front of you. That should have been already uploaded, so you have access to that now. I have several labs, and by the way, I'm going to give these to you. The reason I give them to you in PPTX and I'll give the labs to you in DocX format is so that you can manipulate them. You can use them however you want in the classroom. Some of them are very basic, like just understanding how Linux, deals with hashes, etc. Understanding how Linux stores its salted hashes. But I said I'm going to give that to you in a DocX format. So once again, you can just use it however you want in your classes. Okay. Those will be posted probably this afternoon because I have to do some edits. I saw a couple typos, so I need to edit those. And then if you need it, and I wanted to get some feedback. We tend to use VirtualBox because it's free. The price is right. I know a lot of universities and colleges, they get VMware. I guess they get a site license so they can share with faculty and students. But the reason I'm using VirtualBox is because not everybody gets that software for free. Can I just do an informal survey? Is there anyone who thinks they're going to need a copy of this VirtualBox VM file that basically is just going to have Kali on it? And the reason I'm saying is if you're not familiar with VirtualBox and how to create a VM using an ISO file, if I give you this file, all you've got to do is double click on it and VirtualBox will automatically import it. So is there anyone that thinks they might need that? If you could just type that in or email me separately. So it's a large file. We're talking about, Kali Linux operating system. So I don't want to distribute that unless, you really need it because it's going to be very big. So, like I said, you can email me directly or contact us in some other way. We'll get that to you. Okay. So this is our agenda for today. We're just going to make sure that we define what, excuse me, what password cracking is. And then understanding the concept of password hashes, right? Also the importance of a concept called salting in password hashing today. And then we'll talk about what password dumps are, where you can find them, where do hackers put them. Then we'll talk about, the several methods that we use today that are most common to attack passwords. And then the concept of word lists. We're going to be using as in our demo here, a word list known as RockU. And the reason I do RockU is basically because it's famous, okay? Every student uses it and knows about it. And, it's just famous. So we can provide that for you too, but I want you to understand what a word list is basically. And then the working with hashcat portion, which I'm going to throw over to Alex, right, Alex? So that you can share your VirtualBox, and then we're going to close. My guess is that we won't be here for 3 hours, okay? Because when I designed this presentation, it was supposed to be in the classroom. And I know a lot of you teach in the classroom, right? And when you're in the classroom, you spend a lot of time troubleshooting, right? In fact, when I did a presentation last year, I did a presentation on Kali Linux, and everybody brought their laptops, and we spent a good portion of the presentation just troubleshooting people in his individual problems. So because we're doing this virtually, we're not going to encounter the same kind of problems. So it should be a little shorter. So I'm just letting you know. Now, my hope is too also that we may have a break, as we go on, and maybe have a break somewhere in between, bathroom break, whatever, and then come back and finish it. Maybe we'll do that before, Alex, I don't know, maybe we'll do the break before the working with hashcat portion. We'll go through the presentation, take a break and come back and you can do the demo. Okay, cool.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, if you need help with any of this stuff, you can always contact me via email. If you have any remaining questions, I'm available to you. Just email me at my GW account. Okay. So what is password cracking? Let's define that, right? So it's a process that's performed either for malicious or non-malicious purposes to try to determine what is the password that matches what we call a password hash that has been stolen, okay? So really what we want to know is learn what the password itself is. Now, if I found a laptop lying around and it was password protected, and if I wanted to access the contents of that computer and I don't have the username password, I would do something very simple. First of all, I wouldn't crack the password. If I'm just interested in getting access, I would just reset the password, right? There are tools out there that allow you to boot off of a flash drive and be able to basically just edit the registry, usually via some kind of live Linux OS, and basically edit the registry and maybe blank out the administrator password, any user passwords, right? If you have physical access. Now, the only obstacle to that would be if the laptop has full disk encryption or whole disk encryption, then that's going to be a problem. But when we do password cracking, we want to learn what the password is. We don't want to reset it. We want to know what it was because there may be an interest in reusing that password, which is what adversaries do today, right? They're hoping that they can leverage something known as password reuse. So if I have the password, they want, and my user account is dvargas. Well, the thinking is, well, maybe dvargas's password from here would be the same password he uses for some other sites. And you know what? I got news for you. Think about your own password use, right? I would probably guess a large percentage of you are using the same password for many sites, right? And you know what? Nope, I'm not blaming. I get it. How many passwords do we have? My God, if I count, I probably have as many passwords as I do like Apple devices in my house. It's amazing. Several years ago, I started thinking, how many Apple devices do I have in my house? We started counting them. And, we had like 16, like just crept out. We had 16, when it came to iPhones and iPads, etc. Well, I'm going to say I have many, many more passwords than that. So, I can only remember so many passwords. So what I tend to do is, and like most people, we tend to do password reuse. Now, we'll talk about multi-factor authentication later, okay? But once again, the whole idea is that, you really want to see what Dave Vargas's password did. And like I said, they can be done for malicious and non-malicious purposes. Those of you who teach red team or have worked on red teams, you know that that's part, if it's part of the scope of work for your red team engagement, well, you know, you may be tasked with trying to figure out what passwords are. Now, this is because in the old days, it was, you got better results with password cracking because in the old days, we didn't have technologies like, you know, that are built into operating systems that would enforce complex passwords, right? Remember in the old days, you know, anybody could have, if you wanted a blank password, you could have a blank password, right? Which is considered a password, right? But now, you know, especially if, you know, working with the advanced operating systems, they will, you can enforce password complexity, right? For example, an Active Directory. Gosh, you know, there's some clients, they force me to change the password. I really want to use a password that I've used before, right? So they won't let you because they'll remember passwords and they'll want you to change the passwords. And that's actually kind of, I don't know, you know, in a way it's really annoying because this is what I've done in some of the websites that they want these complex passwords. I will put a complex password, right? That I won't even write down, will never remember, right? So when it's time to log into that site again, what do? I ask to reset the password because I'll never remember the original password, right? So, you know, maybe that's good for security. Maybe that's good for security. Yeah, but what we're seeing today, you know, you know, for the malicious purposes of password cracking, basically it's for password reuse. But we're going to talk later about like now with the use of multi-factor authentication, things like tokens, etc. Its use is not it's not as great as it used to be. However, you should be teaching this to your students because there are a lot of basic security concepts involved with password cracking that are be of value to them. Okay, just, you know, understanding what hashing in is, understanding what salting is. So a lot of good basic concepts also gets hands on keyboard. You know, I'm a big fan of teaching things in the lab. In fact, if I don't teach a course in a lab, I just don't want to teach the course. I'm very clear to my directors. If it's not a lab course, I just don't want to teach it. Because for me, I really see the value of getting, you know, getting those students hands-on keyboard skills, okay, in practice. And, you know, teaching things like password cracking, maybe they'd be doing it in the field, maybe not, you know, probably if they do it, it's going to be a very, very small percentage that are doing it, but it's what's behind teaching password cracking that's going to be of value. So if we look at, oh, and they can be performed online and offline. And that's important because whether it's online or offline determines which password cracking tool you're going to use, okay? For example, if it's online, that means it's real-time cracking. You may be using an application like Hydra, which is very important for that purpose. And if it's offline, for example, that's what I like hashcat, which is what we're going to be using in this course or in this presentation. Why do I use hashcat? The reason I use hashcat as opposed to like John the Ripper, a lot of people still use John the Ripper, and there's nothing wrong with John the Ripper, but if there's an up and coming password cracking utility, it's really going to be hashcat. And one of the reasons is because they really, really do focus on speed of cracking, and, you know, especially when it comes to brute force. So we'll talk about that as the session progresses, but that's why I picked hashcat. Okay. And also more and more frequently as we prepare our students for, you know, CTF competitions, right? Capture the flag competitions, that appears to be one of the preferred password cracking utilities. So it's going to help them if they compete in CTFs, if they understand hashcat. Not that you can't use, like I said, John the Ripper, it's been around for a very, very long time, but I think this hashcat is growing enough in popularity that's worth us focusing on that. So what are we doing when we crack a password? If you look on the bottom left of the screen there, you're seeing there, that's a hashed password, okay? And then, so what we're doing is we're using, in the middle, we have this password cracking application or utility, and the whole idea is to figure out what the password is, which in this case is, that's the password. So that's what's happening with password cracking. So let's talk about
something I was just going to throw in. Also, just quickly mention on the previous slide, in the field of cybersecurity, cryptography, password cracking plays a very important role because, I mean, the process of recovering password it can be used in order to compromise or restore the security of the system. And another thing, so password cracking tends to be viewed as a bad thing because of its name. People think password cracking, cracking a password to access something I'm not supposed to do. But in the field of cyber IT, we have penetration teams, and often that penetration team, red team, blue team, they can be tasked with conducting a security check of an application, and maybe finding maximum number of existing vulnerabilities in the system. So, I mean, a lot of network security involves password cracking, where people are trying to troubleshoot and make sure their routers and internet connection is secure.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, I said, you know, that trying to crack passwords by red team could be part of the scope of work for the engagement for the red team. But you know what? You can do this on your own. You know, if you do it on your own, basically you're just auditing your own passwords. But the hope is that, you know, you shouldn't be worried about like passwords that are in Active Directory. Really, you have to be concerned about application passwords, like things that may be homegrown, if you know what I'm talking about. You know, you've got developers in-house that are developing applications for the organization's use. You know, what kind of, what are their protections, you know? So usually if it's Active Directory, those are usually pretty well protected, those passwords, but it's the other password that you have to be concerned about. Thank you, Alex, for adding that. Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's look at the structure of a password hash, right? Passwords, right, as some of you know, are not saved by an operating system, or should not be saved by applications in clear text format, right? Essentially, passwords are going to be stored in this thing called a hashed format. And we're going to talk about in a couple minutes that it's not just a hashed format, it's going to be a salted hash format. So if you look at the graphic on the right-hand side, there's my little favorite password, by the way. What we're doing is basically converting or taking that password and essentially running what we call a one-way hashing algorithm or a hash function, and then coming with the hash example that's below. So a couple of characteristics of these hash functions, they're called one way. And the reason is because we can very quickly and easily, right, get this string of numbers that you see on the bottom in red, but it's computationally feasible. That's the term we use in cyber. It's computationally infeasible to figure out what the password is by just analyzing what the password hash is, okay? Now, I want to say hashing is not encryption. And why do I say this? It really bugs me when I read articles, whatever, and they refer to passwords as being encrypted. Passwords are not encrypted. Could they be encrypted? Absolutely, they could be encrypted, but typically we're not. And so why is that? Well, encryption algorithms, when we think about symmetric and asymmetric encryption, they require a key, right? And that key is just, you know, an extra a piece of material. So for any time somebody, if passwords are encrypted, okay, that means that I'd have to, whoever's trying to use that password would also have to have a copy of the key. And that's just not feasible with the way the internet is structured today, okay? So remember that hashing is not the same as encryption. Hashing algorithms do not use keys. What you're seeing on the right is how a hashing functions. You don't see a key anywhere. Basically, you take that hash function and those hashes like SHA-1 or SHA-256, MD5, whatever it is, will give you what we call the hash signature, which is what we see on the bottom. But when it comes to password, we call it the hash password. So let's just review the login process when a user logs.
One more thing I was going to add as well to that. So with the cryptographic hashes, they are used everywhere from password storage to file verification systems such as checksum. A lot of times when we download something, we want to check the integrity of the download. So the basic idea is to use a deterministic algorithm that takes one input and creates a fixed length string each time. So deterministic algorithm is a process that produces a unique and predefined results from an input. So that is, using the same input always leads to the same result. So determinism is an important, not only for hashes, but it's also, if you change one bit, one character in that input, it will create a completely different hash. So the problem with hashing algorithms is the inevitability of collusions. So that is the fact that hashes are a fixed length string. It means that for every input we can imagine, there are possible inputs that will result the same hash. So when you have same passwords, the ones that are hashed, it will be the same exact hash. So when it's in a database, it can create collusions, which can create weaknesses and vulnerabilities if an attack occurs.
Yeah. So yeah, and Alex makes the good point about these hashes that, you know, if those of you know the CIA triad, right? Hashes fall under the integrity leg of the CIA triad. And so what does that mean? That means that what makes these powerful is that if we're taking this input, just like Alex said, and we just change one character, add one character, delete one character, whatever, that'll be quickly detected because the hash will be completely different, okay? completely different. So, but but please, when you keep in mind, think about it. The hash is used slightly differently in operating systems. Okay, which is why I wanted to, I'm doing this, like, understanding password hashes. You'll see from an OS perspective, it's different than how we use it from integrity elsewhere. All right, so what's the login process, right? When a user gets to their system, they're going to enter their username and password, right, at their system. Please note that whatever password they enter is going to be hashed right then at their computer, okay? So as they hit enter, their operating system is going to hash that password as per how the operating system is configured to hash, right? And then what's sent across the network is actually that hash, okay? So in other words, what's being typed at the keyboard in the clear is not what's being sent. It's the hash, it's the computer's hashing that password itself, and it's gonna send that. Now that database where the user is gonna be authenticated could be local, right? The user could be logging into the system itself, which is local. You're logging into your Windows 10 system that's not part of a Windows domain, or you're logging into your Kali Linux system that's right there on your laptop. Or it could be remote, okay? Either way, whether it's you logging into remote, like authentication server, like an Active Directory, or you're logging to the computer itself, still your password is going to be converted to a hash. And then whoever receives it, say it's the server receives the hash, basically it's just going to do a comparison. So it looks at the dvargas, it looks on its file and says, this is dvargas's password hash, and is what I was sent match? And if it matches, well, then they're authenticated. If it doesn't match, you'll get an error message. Okay. So different operating systems use different hashing algorithms, okay? And by the way, on the right-hand side, that graphic there is just a partial list of the hashing algorithms that hashcat supports, okay? There's quite a few of them. But what I want to say, go back to the left here, you'll notice that Linux, and you'd have to look at your Linux distribution, specific Linux distribution, to see exactly what hashes it supports. But, most common, you'll see MD5. Although that said, probably shouldn't be using MD5 today. It is a deprecated algorithm. Although you will still see MD5 still used in forensics, digital forensics, when they're validating or actually verifying a forensic image. They use, like if you look at FTK Imager, we'll still use MD5. And actually they also use SHA-1, which I find interesting because MD5 and SHA-1 are both deprecated hashing algorithms. They're no longer considered secure. However, for forensics, they're kind of an exception that for their purposes, they're still considered secure. And then when it comes to Linux, you can support things like SHA-256, SHA-512. SHA-512 actually happens to be the default for most Linux distributions today. Okay, and we'll talk about why that is. And then Windows, those of you who work with Windows, remember Microsoft LM and NTLM. So what that means is that you may have to tailor or the password cracking utility you're using, you have to make sure first it supports the hash that you're going to be trying to crack, right? So what this means is that you should know in advance what that password password is hashed in. Okay. Now, what happens if you don't know? Well, then you have to guess, right? Now that doesn't mean you can't run more than one hash, one algorithm when you're trying to crack something. Okay. But I guess the point is that the hashing algorithms used are OS specific, although in Linux, you can tell it to use a different hash over another hash. But typically, most users will use the default for Linux, which is going to be SHA-512. Okay. Now, one thing about these hashes is that longer is better. Okay. And so here we're comparing the password, which I've been using, as it was hashed by SHA-1, SHA-256, and SHA-512. Okay. So those of you who are familiar with encryption and encryption key sizes, it's the same logic with hashing algorithms, right? The longer the key size, say the longer the size of your asymmetric and symmetric keys or symmetric keys, the more difficult it is to determine what that key is, right? Because when you're doing a brute force attack, you have many more options to select. So, and the thing about increasing the size of the hash here, it doesn't really require a lot of additional computational power, unlike when you're doing encryption, because really it's just a password hash, right? This is calculated when the password hash is determined. So really what's being stored is what's going to be on the right. Now, not exactly, we're going to talk about the concept of salting later, but what's going to be stored is on the right. There are no additional calculations performed by the operating system because this is not encryption. Okay, so remember that hashing is not encryption. So where are these password hashes stored? Linux, we're going to see in a couple of minutes, and actually you can see on the bottom there, stores it in a file called etc shadow. If you go back to your Linux history, Linux also has a file called etc pwd or etc password. And etc password is where Unix used to save its password, right? That's why it's named password, PASSWD. But in the early 90s, somebody said, you know what, maybe we need to protect this file, and we can't get rid of the password file because there were so many utilities in Unix that required read access to the file. And since it contained the password, what they decided was, well, you know what, let's take the password out of the password file and put it its own file, okay, located in the same directory, in the etc directory, and put the password in there. And the difference is that the password file could still be readable, human readable, but the area that had the password, which is right after the user ID, now has an X instead of the password. And then what they did was they made the shadow file available only to privileged users. So if you look at my command on the bottom of the screen, you notice I'm doing sudo cat etc shadow, right? Why is that? Because for me to be able to cat or display the contents of the shadow file, I have to, give it, have to do sudo, or I have to do it with super user privileges, essentially. Now, what you're seeing here is just a small picture of what you're going to see in the shadow file, right? But the reason I picked the top there because the very first account you're going to see is root. And we're going to analyze what all this means here. You see root colon $6 $6 We're going to analyze what that means because that little text there not only has the password hash, it also has something known as the salt in it. Okay, cool. So here we go, going to salting. So what is it? It involves appending or prepending, okay? Now, whether you append or prepend depend on your operating system, okay? But essentially, the point is that you're adding this random value, okay, to the password before it is hashed. And I got this little graphic down here from WordFence. It's pretty decent, okay, that demonstrates this fact. And the reason that we have salting was because there was this attack quite a, I don't know, what, 10 years ago, maybe a little less than that, but that was really popular, called rainbow table attacks. And I don't know if any of you have ever done this kind of attack. I remember, essentially you have to compute a table, and it basically was, given the technology at the time, was like an overnight thing, to compute these tables. But what they were these pre-computed hashes. And what they did was they made password cracking much, much faster. And I'll talk about why that is. So they developed this idea of adding this randomness to the password so that rainbow attacks would no longer be effective. And we'll talk more about that in a couple minutes, okay? So, passwords were once hashed in the exact same way all the time, okay? So if two users, say Alex and I both had the password, okay, and we looked at the shadow file, we would have the exact same hash, okay? And now what we do is use this salt to randomize the hash. So if you look at the graphic on the right-hand side, what I'm trying to demonstrate that is there's two passwords, they're the exact same password, but if you look at the hash on the bottom, they're complete different hashes. Okay, why are they different hashes? Because essentially there was a random value determined by the operating system, okay, that was added to the hash to be able to make it more random, right? So notice the salt can be stored in the user account database along with the hash, or it could be part of the hash string itself. And we're going to see that in Linux, you can actually see the hash of your password, okay? And there it is, okay? So this is an example of a salted Linux password hash. There's the same file I had before, which was the etc shadow file, and I looked at root, okay? So if we look at the fields at the bottom part of the screen, after the first $sign, by the way, the $signs are used as separators. They don't really mean anything. But after the first $sign, the fact is there's a 6 there, basically says that this password was hashed using SHA-512, okay? So where do you look that up? It's just something you have to learn, right? If you ever see a 6, and most of the time when you look at the password hashes in etc shadow file, it will stay $6 $, unless you're looking at an older Linux system that has some, that's legacy, that's had accounts there for a long time. But any new passwords on new Linux distros will have a 6 on them. And like I said, you can use something else if you want to, but why would you do that? Why would you downgrade your security? So after the second $sign, which is what I have in the box there, between the second and the third $signs, that is actually the salt value, which is a .8F040IG JRKSETIG. That is the salt value, okay? And then after the third $, that is the salted hash. And it's kind of important for me to say that because it is not the password hash, okay? It's more technically accurate to say this is the salted password hash because it's not just the password hashed, it's the salt plus password hash. So we say that's the salted password hash. Okay.
David,
Yes.
one other thing I actually, when I was researching the salt as well, salting password actually had like essentially like there's a version before or like the way that passwords were salted at first. There was a unique like a static salt essentially that was used, and that was a vulnerability because a rainbow table was essentially upgraded to have like a static salt guess as well. Yeah. So now essentially all the salts that are used, they have to be unique and
fantastic.
random.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. To add to the randomness. Thank you for sharing that, Alex. I appreciate that. All right. So let's talk about password dumps and what the role is in cyber today. So what people think is that when companies get hacked and passwords are stolen, that the passwords are actually the password. So if my password is password and I was compromised, which by the way, you'll see I did this one here. Let me jump ahead there. If some of you have ever been to the Have I Been Pwned site, okay? So I went in there, you can determine whether your user ID or your email address was ever found in some kind of password dump, okay? And notice I entered mine for my company, d0rd@vg.com, and I started my company in 1996, so I've been around for a while. And needless to say, when I put that in there, it said that my password was included in 19 breach sites, okay, 19, okay? So what that means is that the passwords that I used for the sites, probably I shouldn't use again, okay? So this is a great site because if you enter your password, and I encourage you to do put all your passwords in there, but if you to your password there, it'll say, oh, LinkedIn. Like for example, this account was involved in a LinkedIn compromise. So now I know, oh, that was the password for that LinkedIn. Let me not use that again, okay? Now we're going to talk again later that like the whole idea of multi-factor authentication really obviates the need to do this anymore, right? Because when you log into most websites now, and I'm not saying all of them, but websites that really hold something important, like your bank or your brokerage account, they really are going to do multi-factor authentication. Okay, even my email accounts at MC and GW, we do multi-factor authentication now, right? I have a token for MC, and I have to put a PIN for GW. All right, so let me go back. So what are these password dumps, also known as credentials? So these are large caches of stolen password-related information. So when an organization, since I mentioned LinkedIn, let me talk about LinkedIn. Once they get compromised, and by the way, what an attacker does on a site depends on where their goal is, right? Right. One thing about, and some of you may know this if you've been in cyber for a while, but in the early days of cyber, say the early 2000s, right? There were a lot of hacks from hackers or script kiddies, whatever you want to call them, that were performed just for bragging rights. Look, I did this, I was able to do this. And then over time, it's evolved into, making money, right? They figured out, wait a minute, why should I be doing this just to brag to my friends that I did this, right? When I can actually monetize this and make some money out of it. So, what they do when they compromise a site is they want to monetize. So if someone is able to steal, okay, the password database, whatever is the contents of the password database, they're going to steal it, but usually it's going to be in hash form. And what they'll do is, they can do two things. They can actually, and this has happened, we'll talk about GitHub and Pastebin, they could post that information up on GitHub or Pastebin for other people to access, okay? And that, it's cool. But if they want to monetize it, then you'll find that on the darknet. Basic, simple. So what they want to do depends on their eventual goal. If it's a criminal, they're going to try to monetize it, so you'll find it on the darknet. But if it's a nation state trying to cause trouble, they may try to put it on the darknet so that it could look like it was actually cyber criminals performing the attack, but you don't really know. Or they would put it up on something like Pastebin or GitHub, okay? So typically what you're going to find in these dumps are going to be a user ID and password hash at a minimum. But you know what? There could be a lot more information in there, okay? but that is at a minimum because that's what's going to be used to authenticate. So what will threat actors do with these? They'll publish the stolen caches, right? Essentially, once again, talk about putting it on GitHub or Pastebin. They can sell the stolen caches, right? It could be a cyber criminal or a nation state. Sometimes you just really don't know because, you know, the attribution is really, really difficult in this space. Or they could try to crack the passwords themselves, right? Because usually, or at least what's supposed to be, is that every password saved is supposed to be saved in its hash format. So they may try to crack it themselves. What's been found on the darknet is typically that attackers don't crack them themselves. The skills required to steal the password database and maybe the skills and the desire to crack them are usually really separate, okay? So, you know, we really have a division of labor in the cyber criminal world. And one thing is that, you know, these password dumps, they're not always neatly formatted, and you're going to have to convert it. If you're going to crack them, they have to be converted into a format that's going to be easier for you to work with and easier to crack. And it's the same thing with hashcat. If you're putting, giving it a file of password to crack, it really does want a certain format. Otherwise it'll error out. And that makes sense because it's computers. Okay. So let's talk about the use of Git repositories and pastebins. And I feel confident that some of you are developers and have accessed these sites. I'm not a developer, but I've had to go to GitHub to download things that I've needed for my job. There's a lot of security tools and cyber stuff up there, in particular stuff related to pen testing. But these are websites that were originally designed for developers so they could host and manage open source software projects. What's interesting about this is that Git, okay, which is a protocol, was actually developed by that's not Linus Torvalds, that's a typo. Linus Torvalds, that's a typo. So by Linus Torvalds in 2005, right, for the development of the Linux kernel. And notice that even though it's used by developers, there's plenty of legitimate uses for these websites, but guess what? Over time, we found that it's also been used by malicious actors, okay? So they are frequently used to store and share stolen code and other types of information, okay? For example, the NSA equation group hackers, okay? They stole a bunch of NSA's hacks and they put it up on GitHub, right? Sony Pictures, I don't know if anybody remembers that Sony Pictures Guardians of Peace. I forget the name of the movie now, but what was it? The one, you know, on North Korea. There was a comedy. Did you remember, Alex? The one where the
interview.
The interview. Thank you, Alex, for that. Yeah, the interview. Well, guess what? I mean, North Korea had been threatening Sony about, you know, releasing this movie, and essentially what they did in retaliation, they hacked Sony, and then they released a lot of stuff on executives and all this other stuff that ended up in embarrassing executives, and there were like resignations, etc. And then the third one was password dumps. You'll see, in fact, you'll see one right here on the bottom right on retailerorvis.com, right? Essentially all the passwords, and I don't want to say password, but really it's the hashes of the passwords. Remember that were released on Pastebin. So if you want to go look for dumps, teach your students to go use GitHub and Pastebins for that, okay? So how do we attack passwords, right? These are the first 5 common attacks. And these are what we call offline attacks. If you want to learn about online attacks with Hydra, that's probably a different course. But yeah, we call these offline attacks because essentially what you're doing is you're grabbing a copy of the password database, you're putting it on your local system, and you're cracking it there. So essentially what you can do is, you know, let your password cracking utility go overnight, over a couple days, and come back later, and hopefully it'll be all figured out. So one of the easiest ways, and I have to add this because I always find it entertaining, is trying to guess what the password is, right? And I have the example on the right-hand side about someone who loves the Cowboys, right? That all this stuff really. By the way, I thought about adding doing Redskins, but there's a lot of controversy around the Redskins today, so I changed it to Cowboys, the Redskins' arch enemy. But you know, essentially trying to use some logic on the person's interests to try to figure out, you know, what that person's password is, right? And when would you want to do that? I mean, what's really funny when you see TV shows, and we all know TV shows are not reality, but you know, you see somebody sitting at a keyboard, some investigator like looking around the person's office and seeing things and then figuring out the password just based on that. You know, that's not truly realistic. But it is an attack, so I just thought I'd mention it. I wouldn't think it'd be successful very often, especially as systems try to enforce complex passwords. So, you know, maybe my son Joshua, maybe my son's name Joshua isn't one of my passwords, but guess what? Because complexity requirements, that A would be an ampersand. You know what I mean? Whatever. And I might add a number, a special character to it. Dictionary attack is what we're going to focus on today. The reason we're focusing on a dictionary attack is because it's fast. It's really fast if it works, okay? And what you're doing is, dictionary is probably a misnomer today. In the early days of password cracking, yes, they were. And let me just tell you a story that actually from us in the field. In my company, the Uruguayan embassy was our customer here in DC. And someone had left the embassy and they wanted to be able to access this laptop that this person used as that person, right? So they wanted us to crack the password of the laptop and, so they could log in as that person and see the desktop and all that stuff there, right? And not that you really need to do that, right? If you want to see that person's stuff, you just go into, their profile. But this, I don't know what their motivation was what they wanted. So I had one of my technicians started try to crack it and was not being successful. And we didn't want to go to a brute force, okay? Because one of the advantages of the dictionary attack is typically very fast, okay? Within minutes, definitely not an hour. Brute force can be hours or days. And so he couldn't crack it. And finally, when I checked in with him, I asked, how'd you do, Enrique? That was his name of the tech. And he said, I figured it out. And the way he figured it out was the Uruguayan embassy, they speak Spanish there, right? So the person's password, because there were no password complexity requirements on this laptop, was a Spanish word, okay? And so what he did was he exchanged an English dictionary that the password cracking utility was using, probably was John the Ripper, because it was a long time ago. And then he replaced it with a Spanish dictionary and it just came up right away, okay? So these are, when you're trying to crack with a dictionary, it's not really a dictionary. It's lots of different passwords and different combinations, but the point is it is a text file, okay? And we'll see when Alex does his demo, we're using what we call the Rocky text file. But it's just a text file that contains lots of words in it that you want to that you're trying to compare with. And by the way, when it comes to dictionary attack and brute force, we're going to talk about brute force next. Typically, it does it one at a time, So what it's going to do is it's going to go down the dictionary, and the first one, it's going to hash according to whatever hashing algorithm you say. Say it's, SHA-512. And then it's going to hash that word and then compare it to what it wants to crack. Oh, that's not it. And it goes to the next one. And basically it goes sequentially down the file until it finds a match, okay? Not very intelligent, but because, it's computers that are pretty fast today, typically it's not so slow. But just note, it's done sequentially, which is important because that's as opposed to when you're doing rainbow tables, because rainbow tables, these hashes are going to be pre-computed. That's the big difference. Dictionary and brute force, they're going to do like real-time comparisons. Whereas when we talk about rainbow tables, you see the main difference is that these caches are already been computed for you, so they're faster. So there's our brute force. So basically, the application is going to systematically check all possible passwords until the correct one is determined. I call this the kitchen sink attack, right? They're going to have to go everything but the kitchen sink at it. Like I said, it's going to be time consuming, but one thing you can be guaranteed with a brute force attack, it's always going to work. Always works. The question is, will you be alive in the 32,000 years that it finally figured it out, right? Because passwords are just so complex today. And if they're really long, complex passwords, it could be a very, very long time before they're cracked. Now, one of the great things about, password cracking utility technology is that there are password crackers that, usually commercial, by the way, but that will use more than one computer to crack, okay? And by the way, we're not talking about NSA cracking things, right? Right, Alex, NSA is not going to use one computer to crack your password, right, Alex? But there are commercial utilities that I have seen that essentially will work kind of as a unit, so you can have 10 computers, the processor from 10 computers trying to crack a password at one time, but it will succeed. But once again, the question is, are you still going to care at that point after it succeeds? You're still going to want that. So the hybrid attack essentially is, basically it's a combination of a dictionary and a brute force attack, where essentially it's going to try to crack parts of it according to a dictionary, and then what doesn't get cracked as part of the dictionary will be treated as a brute force. So it's kind of a combination. And then we have rainbow table. I have to mention this because it's always mentioned, but I'll tell you right now, this is just not, you're not going to see this today. It just doesn't work. Like I said, when I worked with rainbow tables years ago, once again, you get something like Rainbow Crack. That's one of the utilities. We'd use Rainbow Crack. You create these, compute these hashes, because you'd have to tell it, what hashing algorithm to use. There were lots of hashing algorithms to use. You'd let it run overnight, and then once you had your table, which was quite large, then you would try to use it to crack your passwords. The problem is that we have is that, once again, we've got salting, and now with salting, this just makes it's a lot harder to do this. Now you'll see that actually hashcat will support salted passwords. That is one of its options, but it goes back to a brute force. It's going to take a long time, right? And so depending on what the motivations are of the threat actor, if they're trying to monetize something right away, they may just move on to someone else, right? Because remember the whole rule of in cyber for cyber criminals, first of all, cyber criminals historically have proven that they're kind of lazy, right? They want the most money for the least amount of work. Well, actually, that sounds like most people actually, but they're going to go after that low-hanging fruit, right? Whatever passwords get cracked first, okay, those are the ones they're going to try to leverage. And I guess that's almost for anything. So yeah, so what's going on here? The key point for these rainbow tables is really that they're pre-computed hashes, and the attack is going to be done in the reverse. So essentially, what happens is they're basically going to look at the hash that you're trying to crack and say, is it in the table? That's it. It's just going to do a lookup. So it can be very, very fast. What's slow is computing the rainbow tables beforehand. Okay. Whew. Okay.
So you got the salts now.
Yeah, because of the salt, exactly. So, but you know what, for those of you who are teaching, even though I teach this stuff at the university, at the college, I don't teach it because it's going to be useful to people in the field, although, I really do want to teach things that are going to be useful in the field when they start working out there. But there's so many other basic concepts embedded in this that you can leverage that I teach it, because, in teaching about password cracking, you teach about all this other stuff. Like I said, we talk about hashing in the encryption course, right? And we hash files and, we change one character in the file and we see how the hash changes. But I like the whole idea that you're seeing the hash actually how it's actually implemented in security space. So there's lots surrounding it that is of value that's worth covering, okay? Now, so what are these word lists, right? They used to be, you can call them password dictionaries if you want, but they're lists of common or specialized words saved in plain text file. So these files are always in plain text format, okay? And we'll see, Alex, I don't know if you can maybe, show the RockU database later, but essentially they're available all over the internet. This is a site called WeakPass, where you can actually get the RockU database from here. It's a huge, 33 gigabytes in size, Alex? I don't remember, but it's like a 33 gigabyte file of, was it like 34 million passwords, if I recall? But essentially, you need these word lists because this is what you're going to hash. When you're doing a brute force or you're doing a dictionary, these are the words that you're going to hash and compare to what's in the password database, okay? So that's how it's done. So you can actually create your own custom word list if you want to. I don't see why you would want to today because it's covered everywhere else, but say, I don't know, maybe some unique aspect of some technology like, biochemistry, words in biochemistry, that's all I can think of. But, you can actually create your own word list if you want to with terms related to biochemistry if the adversary is trying to attack, a biochemistry type company or biotech company, okay? Cool. And like I said, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, something maybe you could elaborate on that could be interesting, because I think a lot of us also think, hey, like on an iPhone or even on a computer, on a PC, we can limit the amount of wrong attempts that, I'm trying to get a password. I only got 3 attempts. Once those 3 attempts are out, I can't no longer try to guess. So,
and that's why we do offline attacks. That's why if you have an online attack, then you can do that. But offline, which we're talking about here, that's why you steal the database, you get access to the data, steal it, and then you bring it to your laptop or your computer and you hack it at home and nobody's going to lock you out. Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that, Alex. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So they get the perspective of how it's actually done, or if you're working with like a hard drive already that's you got in possession.
Yep. Exactly. Thank you. Yep. So here's a huge word list file. It's 15 gigabytes. Okay. So just to show you that
one, not the 32 one.
yeah. So just goes to show you that and the reason this is such a big word list is because what they've done here at CrackStation is created lots of different word lists. So I don't know, this would be the ideal word list file, word list. Now, once again, and you students need to know about this, right? But multi-factor authentication kind of makes this not as useful anymore, right? Right? I could know, right? I could know Alex's password, right? What password, Alex, what's your password?
It's the password.
All right, Alex is not going to tell me his real password. That's okay. But, you know, believe it or not, you could give people what your password is on systems that are a multi-factor authentication, right? Why not? I can give Alex my password for my MFA at GW because guess what? He's not going to be able to use it because he's missing the additional factor, right? Which is in GW, it's a token. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if any of you have heard about this, but several years ago, Microsoft wrote a blog that said, you know what? Don't use complex passwords. You may as well use easy passwords. And you know what? Feel free to write them down. Okay. And you know what? It made perfect sense to me. Okay. Because if the systems behind are properly protecting them, it doesn't really matter whether your password is complex or not. Does that make sense? The problem today is that, well, guess what? A lot of them are not, these sites are not well protected and they get compromised. So, and why is that? Because what's being exploited are, you know, the applications are being exploited greatly, right? Those homegrown, developed applications are the weakest applications, the ones with the most vulnerabilities. Not to say that, you know, there aren't non-homegrown, you know, commercial off-the-shelf applications that are not vulnerable, but the ones that you develop in-house are more likely to be vulnerable and more vulnerable than anything else. And if someone has to use a password, say they don't have single sign-on, if they have to authenticate to the, and I've seen these, I've had clients where, you know, they log into the network and then to access these specialized like web servers with enterprise level apps, they have different passwords, okay? And, you know, and you know, you can have 10 of those in a large organization and the user would have different passwords in all of those. And you have to ask, what's the security of the passwords on those applications that are created by the enterprise, okay? So let's talk about the Rocky word
David,
list.
actually,
Yeah, go
we've
ahead.
got a question on the floor. Ihab was asking a question regarding the previous slide, if websites like CrackStation are safe to use and navigate on.
You always have to be careful. I mean, I would navigate anything safely that unless it ends in .onion, right? .onion. Yeah, I mean, and you got to remember. I mean, this is on the clear internet, so you're not on the dark net. Yeah, you have to be careful wherever you go, whatever you download. But I would just make sure that whatever you download here is actually a text file. So most likely it's going to be compressed. So it's zip. Now, if you see a zip format, which was like, well, you got to be careful about that, right? Because what happens when you unzip it, right? So if you feel insecure about any site, do it in a virtual machine. I mean, plain and simple. You can, you know, this is why like understanding VirtualBox is such a critical skill in cyber. I mean, I don't see how you can work in cyber today and not understand how to do virtualization, whether it's with VMware or VirtualBox or any other solution or Parallels, whatever you use. But yeah, I think CrackStation is pretty safe, and CrackStation actually has another feature too. It'll actually allow you to do more than just download this word list. So they're worth investigating because you can actually do. They have a cracking in the cloud, which I think it'll be part of your lab. You know, they allow you to do password cracking on the cloud. Now you do have to be careful about that, right? When you enter passwords on different sites. I don't know if you've ever seen the sites that will crack your passwords for free, and they end in .ru. Sorry, Alex, I had to say that. Be cautious of those, the ones that, you know what I mean, RU or any else potentially malicious site. But that's a good question. Thanks for asking that. All right, so this RockU word list is really famous, okay? This goes way back to a compromise, a SQL injection attack on this company in 2009. And this was a big deal at the time because there were so many passwords. Look at this, over 14 million unique passwords were stolen, okay? Why? This is crazy. Already, you sitting down for this? They saved all their passwords in plain text. Okay. How, even for back then in 2009, that was insane. Okay. I don't know. Maybe there'd be a lawsuit about that today. Maybe there were lawsuits that I'm not familiar with. But what that meant was now someone have access to a word list, and this is like equivalent of getting a dump. But remember, I said before, when you steal from a website, they're all in hash format and, you know, they're not formatted well, essentially. Well, guess what? They basically did the decryption for you. So this was a big deal at the time. And it's a large file, not quite in the gigabyte size, but it's 133 megabytes. But it's big because this is text, TXT. And I'm going to say it's great for practice. So I encourage you to teach your students about RockU. It's one of those word lists that are used frequently in CTFs. Okay. But, you know, for today's strong passwords, it's just not going to be effective. Okay. And you can actually view this file. It'll take a while. There's just a snapshot of the first couple of entries. And I do want to warn you, this caveat on the right-hand side, be careful that it has bad words in it. I know. Would you think that people put bad words in their password? What do you think, Alex? Isn't that terrible? Putting bad words in your password. But there are bad words in here. So why do I say that? I don't know. For some of you, if you're teachers teaching kids below 18, I don't know what the rules are. You know, that if they find bad words in there, but it does contain bad words. So yeah, like I said, so let me emphasize, RockU is an important word list because it's kind of like a dump, except the passwords are already being encrypted for you. Today, the dumps, the password, I'm sorry, are hashed, not encrypted, they're hashed. So this is really have a lot of appeal. All right, so working with hashcat, I'm gonna do a quick intro to hashcat and then we'll take a break and then Alex is gonna come back and, you know, end it for us. All right, so hashcat, it's an open source password recovery tool, okay? And that advertises itself as the world's fastest password cracker. And that's really one of the sells for hashcat. It's really fast, okay? So, you know, as compared to other tools. And one of the reasons it's fast is because it uses GPU in addition to CPU. Not to say that's the only password cracker that does that, but they've actually had some other modifications that make it fast. It's multi-platform. So if you want to use it on Linux, which is where we're using it, and by the way, why do we do it in Linux, okay? When I was in the field, 90% of the computers for our clients that were supported, or 95 were Windows. So really, Windows is, from a blue team perspective, really you do want to focus on Linux, but I'm sorry, on Windows. But you know what? All the cool tools are on Linux, right, Alex? I mean, there's so many tools that, you know, when I talk about knowing virtualization, your students should know virtualization to work in cyber, without a doubt. They need to know Linux, okay? And I don't know if any of you follow Brian Krebs. I don't know, Alex, if you read the article I sent to the class from Brian Krebs. He has his latest blog has to do with what employers are looking for. And you know what? Wasn't Linux the top thing? Yeah. Alex, do you remember? Yeah. Employers were being asked, you know, that they're very dissatisfied with the students that we're producing. Okay. And I understand that because you know what? In a lot of our classes, they're too lecture based. And me being in the field, you know, having owned a company, when I used to hire students from my classroom. And what was I looking for? I was actually looking for good hands-on skills. Okay. You know, lots of hands-on experience work. And so in this Brian Krebs blog that just came out, should still be up there. And if you want it, I'll send it to you. I have a copy. If not, basically Linux was number one. Okay. Now, when you look at Linux in the enterprise, like I said, most of the stuff is going to be Windows, right? But when you look at really critical applications, you know, especially when it comes to large databases, typically they're going to be on Linux. So your students should have a good understanding. And you know what? They don't have to be expert in Linux. But you know what I don't want to see when I was hiring? I didn't want to see anybody afraid from working the command line, you know? You know, I want to know that they can get to bash, they can do the basics like, you know, a CD, ls, you know, rm, you know, whatever, understand the major differences between the major files, okay? But yeah, definitely when you run these tools, I would encourage you to stay away from the Windows version, okay, which are easier to run, and always try to do your tools on the Linux side, just so that your students get more Linux hands-on experience, okay? Now, that means that some of you are going to have to, you know, learn Linux a little better. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with knowing too much Linux. Okay. And like I said, it's become very popular over time for red teamers, etc. Now, I do want to say something on the bottom left, because Alex, right? We talked about this. I'm going to say the bottom right, the recommendation. We're going to see. One of the labs I'm going to give you on hashcat. We're using Kali. Okay. You can use any other pen testing, you know, distro. I use Kali, but there's Parrot, there's a whole bunch of other ones, right? You could use. The reason that we want to use a pen testing distro, because the utilities on the pen testing distro, like hashcat, are more likely to run properly because it's been tested on that distro before it's released. Does that make sense? You know? So Alex and I, right, over the weekend, I have in the lab where you can put it on Fedora. Okay, Alex must love Fedora. Okay,
that's what you teach.
I taught, well, only that class. Yeah, I teach in my classes. I teach Fedora in one class, so students have access to a Red Hat based distribution, And then when we get to more advanced classes, I switch to Kali so they can work on a Debian-based distro. And why is that? One of the main reasons, actually, and it's just, it's the package manager. I want you to know things like different package managers, if that makes any sense. So that if you're going to install something, which is a frequent skill, right, in cyber, that you know that you're going to do DNF install in the Red Hat base, and you're going to do apt in the Debian base. So I try to give my students access to both. But clearly, if your student's going to be working in cyber, you're going to be probably most likely using some kind of Debian-based operating system. But what we found, right, over the weekend, Alex, is that, you know, when you install it in Fedora, you know, there may be some troubleshooting required, right, Alex? You experienced that?
The Wordlists are not there. So with Kali, since like it's the Debian base, it's used for those penetration and, you know, attacking troubleshooting techniques. So it had the word list already installed and downloaded.
Yeah.
And what I ran into Fedora, since it was just, you know, standard distro, I installed the hashcat. That was the software that we're gonna go through and try to decrypt some passwords. But the word lists were not on that distribution.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the advantages of the pen testing distro, right? There's word lists. Yeah, so, you know, it's not that if I don't know what distribution you're teaching in your courses. So I guess the point is, if you're going to install it or run this on a distro that's not a pen test focused distro, one, be prepared to, I mean, you can install it, you know, sudo dnf install hashcat, but if there's any troubleshooting, maybe some troubleshooting may be required. And also you're going to have to create your own word list directory and put your word list in there. Whereas guess what, if you just do locate word lists on Kali, you're going to find a whole bunch of word lists already there for you. And you can add more to it, right? So now some of you like troubleshooting. I know Alex likes troubleshooting. He's a sharp guy and he understands that troubleshooting makes him better, right, Alex?
I tried to an extent.
Yeah, but me, I'm an old guy. I've done enough of my troubleshooting. I just want to work so I can go do something else. So one thing about hashcat, it's going to come pre-installed on most pen testing focused distributions. For example, right, this is Kali, and you're going to find it under the password attacks theme. Okay, so that's what it looks like, and you see among other password cracking utilities. Now, I want to note what's really cool. So you see offline attacks and online attacks on the top of the right of the screen grab there. So if you click offline there, you would have seen hashcat in there too. But I like that Kali presents it in this format. So if you want to do an offline attack, as opposed to an online attack, you click on offline, it'll directly take you to all those that will do offline. Once again, this session is based on offline attacks, not online attacks. I said that's a different course because things are done completely different there, okay? And also one idiosyncrasy on hashcat is when you launch it, you have to do hashcat-h or hashcat-help, otherwise it won't work. So basically what you do when you run hashcat is that you have to display the help screen, okay? You know, if you want to see what the options are. And just reminders that if you are going to install it, right, essentially if you're installing it on a Red Hat based distro that doesn't have it already on, you might sudo dnf install hashcat. And if it's a Debian based distro that's not pen testing focused, right, you do sudo apt install hashcat, okay? Now, where does it go, right? Typically it's going to go to the USR bin directory or hashcat directory. And remember that's in USRs where all installed software are. Oh, and then bin for binaries where any executable is not required for booting it'll be installed. If it's an executable that's required for booting, it'll go in the /boot directory. Okay. And then word lists. So I talked about that. You know, if you want to see the word lists that are available on Kali, you could just go type in locate word lists, and you're going to see all these subdirectories for word lists. And then at the end, you're going to see all these text files. So you're going to notice they're all text files. Word lists should be text files, with the exception of, if you look at the bottom screen grab, that rocky.txt.gz, it was compressed with gzip. And one of the reasons it's so big. So basically what you would do is you run the command I have on the left, right, sudo gzip-d for decompress, rocky.txt.gz, and that'll decompress Rocky for you. If it's not decompressed, then you're not going to be able to use it, right, in its compressed format. And one thing that hashcat does that's really neat, I want to add it, it's create these pot files, okay? So what it does, the pot file actually will keep track of hashes that were already cracked, okay? So that if you run another crack and it's already been cracked, why is it going to bother? It's just going to do a lookup there and find out. So I think that's pretty cool, okay? So let's break down the command that Alex sees. Like I said, when he does his hands-on, he'll go over, but You know, this is a typical hashcat command here on the left here, which is for a dictionary attack. And why we do in the dictionary is because it's just faster, right? We don't have time. I don't, you know, doing a brute force, I'll grow some more gray hairs here. But in the hashcat, it breaks it down. So you'll see that and I'll go to the right. So you see the option is -M, and then there's a 0 there, okay? The letter options are gonna stay the same, but that 0, basically what's this denoting is MD5, okay? Alex will show you later when he does the hands-on, the other numbers that are available. So if you say you're doing SHA-512 or SHA-256, that 0 would change to a different number, okay? And then the -A0 says do a dictionary attack. Hashcat supports lots of other attacks. You know, they could support brute force, in addition to dictionary, hybrid, etc. And you would tell Kali which one to do by changing that 0 to another number. Like I said, in this lab, I made it really simple because I wanted it to go fast, okay? And then -0 crack passwords. This is where the output's gonna go, okay? So you gotta tell it, and the -O is for output. Whatever you crack, put it in this separate file called cracked pwds.txt. And what you would do, once hashcat is done, you would just cat that file, and then you'd see the cracked password, or actually from dictionary attack. The stolen hashes, that's the input file. So in other words, that would be that password dump that was stolen. But remember, you have, you know, it's a lot of password dumps, they require reformatting. So you have to make sure that the input file is in a format that's acceptable to hashcat. And then what word list you're going to use. The last one is what word list. Now notice I put the entire path to the RockU database. And by the way, I put rocku.txt because when you unzip the gzip file from before, it's going to unzip to rocku.txt. So when you put these commands, it actually makes a lot of sense. You know, you're telling it what the hashing algorithm was, how do you want to attack it, where are you going to put whatever you crack, okay? What's the source? Where are the stolen or hash passwords now? Salted hash passwords or hash passwords. By the way, in this demo, they're not salted, okay? I created these easy because it's fast, okay? Anything that's salted, and by the way, hashcat doesn't have an option for salted passwords. Guys, it's gonna take a long time. So if you wanna play with that, feel free, but I would just like let it go over the weekend and see on Monday morning whether it comes back to something you want. And then of course, we tell it what word list to use. Okay, cool. All right. I'm not sure. Can you see? I wanted to take a 10-minute break, people. What do you think about a 10-minute break? And then we'll come back and do the demo hands-on. Any objection? Alex, do you see? I don't. I only see the screen here. So.
I can currently see you speaking as well as the slides.
Okay.
But if you want to take a 10-minute break, that is probably the perfect time.
Is that you, Ty?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm going to time a 10.
Now?
Yeah, we'll do a 10-minute break.
Okay. So around 10:40, we can come back on again.
Yep. 10:40. Thank you.
No problem.
Professor Vargas. Oh, he left. Took his headphones.
Do you need help with anything, Alex?
No, I've got everything configured. I was just so there's like a file that we follow along. I'm not sure if that was provided because I think he mentioned something that there will be a file that's gonna talk about the lab that that the attendees can follow as well.
Okay.
Follow along.
Okay, so there are a few options. I know he's off the.
So I think got it. Otherwise, there should be. Let me see.
Okay. It can be uploaded to the chat option, or I can upload it directly to Hoover. So whenever you all figure it out.
I think on the Hoover, he only has the presentation uploaded at the moment.
Yes. So I have the direct link that will allow content to be updated if you would like for me to upload that, or there's also the option of putting it directly in the chat box if it's something that you want quick access to. So
okay. I think so. Once he's back, I think, and I hope sooner than 10 minutes. I would double check with him really quick. Otherwise, I mean, I have all my stuff ready to demo the lab. It's just will make it easier for everyone to follow.
Okay, that works.
Alex, we have two questions actually on the Whova Q&A. I
Mhm.
don't know if you want to answer it when we get back, or we can just write down something. You're able to access Whova, right?
So I have it on my other computer. I saw a question that was typed in the chat. We answered that one, but I haven't seen anything that popped from Huwa.
Sure. How about I privately chat it to you so we can post it on the Whova?
Yes, that would be cool. That would be
All right.
good.
Sweet, Alex.
Thank you, JR.
Thank you.
Also, while waiting, if there are any participants that need the VM that Mr. Vargas mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I think now would be a good time to go ahead and send me a private chat, or just put it in the chat box if you would need access to that file. For anyone that didn't hear that, there is a VM that Mr. Vargas mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. If you need access to that, please let me know and I will make sure that they can get that to you. I see that some people have requested, so just let me know.
It's a very general question, Alex, but I sent it to you through a private chat on Zoom.
Okay, so once Mr. Vargas gets back on, I will get the file to you all. I do know that there are similar environments in the Virginia Cyber Range. I don't know how many of you all have accounts, but if you would like to practice and you don't want the actual VM, that is also an option, but I don't want to say anything wrong, so I'm going to wait for him to get back on the screen so that we can make sure. Hi, Dave. So a few
I
people have requested the VM.
okay. They're gonna have to email me. If they wouldn't mind having them email me.
Okay.
So I have, we had that conversation about how I'm gonna post that. Yeah, but if you could just email me directly, and once I get the list of everybody, I'll create some kind of link. Yeah.
Sure. Did you get a chance to upload it to Google Drive?
No. I'm not. I have to clean out my hard drive a little bit first.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
So I added the email to the chat box. I don't know if you know this, but do you know what environment is similar to the VM that you are using, like the environment in the Virginia Cyber Range?
No, I don't.
Where? Okay.
Mm-mm.
Well,
I mean, you know what? They should be able to use any Kali or any pen testing distro. So if it's Kali, it's going to work because hashcat comes pre-installed with Kali,
okay.
and it should be very similar, the same. I mean, word lists and everything. Yeah.
Okay, so for anyone that's interested in using the Virginia Cyber Range, if you already have an account, it would be the Kali Linux environment.
Yeah.
It should be probably like the top 3 when you create a new environment to choose from.
Okay. Thank
But
you.
the email is here for anyone that would like the downloadable VM.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think, and I think the cyber range is good. I've seen it. I don't use it because of GW. Even though we have a campus in Ashburn, Virginia, we're headquartered in DC, so we're not viewed as a Virginia school. So we don't get access to like a lot of the Virginia schools do. So I've only seen it. But definitely, I would encourage professors, teachers to teach their kids to also create VMs locally on their local desktop. I think that's a really important skill also.
Awesome.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, yeah, we've actually got a couple questions from the attendees. One of them was can passphrases be cracked easily?
They're crack phrases. No, they cannot be cracked easily. Remember I said longer is better. So if it's a long phrase, you'd have to resort to a brute force attack and just throw a couple of like complex characters in there. And yeah, it would not be cracked with a dictionary. It'd be a brute force attack for a passphrase. But remember, it's got to be a decently sized passphrase.
Now that's used a lot.
Mhm.
'Cause it's just
Dave, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Dave, this is Chris Stark. I'm from Ashburn, Virginia. And I asked that question just I was curious if there was like some kind of automated type system or program that would, maybe link common dictionary words together in some way, shape, or form. I know it might take a long, long time to do that. I just wasn't sure how that worked when it came to a passphrase.
Chris, thanks for your question. I teach in Ashburn, so I'm not too far from you.
Oh, fantastic.
But yeah, I teach at the GW Ashburn campus. Yeah, no, actually hashcat does that. It's called a combinator attack. And it will combine different, like if you give it more than one word list, it'll combine it. Like for example, I think I have it in the lab. When you get it, it says, if one word list has French and the other one has fries, it'll combine into French fries.
Oh,
So
interesting. Okay.
yeah, you can feed it more than one word list and it will use, now obviously it's going to take a little longer to do that, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But no, that is possible. Yeah, absolutely. It's called a combinator attack.
Interesting. Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, if you've got one more, do you know if there are any lessons in the Virginia Cyber Range that use hashcat? And then in parentheses, I know of a few that use GTR. I suppose that's the John the Ripper.
Yeah. I don't. Ty, maybe you could answer that question.
Yes. So JR, if you'd like to answer that.
Sure, thanks. Small world. I actually live in Ashburn as well, right by that Chick-fil-A actually in one Loudon area. So
that's where we are, right there.
Yeah, small world.
My house. Yeah.
Yeah, I went to Broad Run High School, like right.
Okay.
Back today. Yeah. How about that? I teach at Briarwoods.
That's cool. Yeah, small world.
I
Anyway,
went to Aurora High School, so we're all in the same.
all in the same.
We're Loudon people. Okay, good. All right.
Yeah, going back to that, there is an environment. I sent the courseware link. It's on the question and answer chat on Whova.
Okay.
If you want me to send that courseware for the hash thing, I will send it as well in the Zoom chat if it's easier, guys.
Yeah, that'd be great. Because I know I've used John the Ripper with my intro level kids just for fun and playing around in Linux a little bit. And I didn't know if hashcat was interchangeable or if it's more preferred to have a lesson dedicated to hashcat because of the nuances between hashcat and John the Ripper. I just wasn't sure. I've never heard about hashcat till today. So.
Oh yeah, I would definitely start moving your students in the direction of John the Ripper.
Okay.
I'm not John the Ripper. I'm sorry, hashcat.
Hashcat, yeah, I got
My
it.
bad. My bad. Yeah.
And then you've got one more. What is the most commonly used hashing algorithm?
You know, it once again, it depends on the OS, but in a Linux environment, it's SHA-512.
Okay.
Remember that Windows uses NTLM still, and there's different versions of NTLM, but in a Linux environment, it's SHA-512 because that's the
I
default.
know with Cyber Patriot, they use MD5 when we're downloading the images.
Yeah. Oh no, but that's just to download the image. That's different, right? You know, like when, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, right? This is Chris talking, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you see the hashes on download sites, is that what you're talking about? Like is that to verify?
Yeah, for Cyber Patriot, they have their different the different images that the kids play around with and earn points off of as far as hardening systems. And so when we download those files, just to make sure they're the same, we have to run that MD5. Was it reverse? 75 reverse?
No, well,
No.
well, I'll tell you right now. That's different. Don't confuse that with how hashing is done for passwords.
Okay.
Because MD5 has been deprecated for more than a decade now.
Okay.
It's not used when you really need high security. When hashes are put on websites for downloads, it is verifying integrity, but it's not verifying that it's in its original form, if that makes any sense. So you'll commonly see MD5, you'll see SHA-1, but you'll never see MD5 or SHA-1 implemented where you really need security. Okay.
Okay.
So if you need low level of security, you can do MD5 SHA-1. But if you're doing that like a passwords of MD5, that would be considered low security.
Okay.
Yeah. So only for downloads.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, with you're looking at the integrity of the images. You know, there's no real need for high level security with those things. Correct. We're not talking about passwords and protecting systems and all that way. But.
Right. And the thinking is that, think about it. I'm a threat actor, and I want to, and this has happened before where things that have been posted on websites have been Trojanized. Okay. And so, and I remember actually a specific example. This was done to Snort years ago. I don't know if you know about Snort, but this is a long time ago. And so they've compromised the website. So they basically pwn the website, right? They can do whatever they want. So if they're going to grab a copy of Snort, they're going to Trojanize it, and they're going to put the copy back up, right, to be downloaded. They're going to also alter the hash at the same time. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, so you see that hash really has no value on a download if you're trying to protect against security. If you want the protection, then you have to do digital signatures, right? But if it's just a hash, there's really no real security in hash. It's only to verify integrity, and that's it. That whatever you downloaded, Trojanized or not, was not corrupted on the download. So, but it's a little different thinking in passwords, yeah. So SHA-512 really is the default for Linux, and you're only going to see, if you look at the Etsy shadow password, you're only going to see sooner or earlier hashing algorithms if they were accounts that were legacy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that'd be a good talking point when we're dealing with the Cyber Patriot kids, as far as downloading the images, and we can really discuss the outdated version, outdated, I guess, MD5.
Yeah, MD5, yeah, and SHA-1. Yeah. And the thing is, because you frequently see MD5 and SHA-1 for downloads. So, and it's okay because you know what it's being used for. But yeah, that's definitely worth spending time. And actually, I love your question, Chris, because that's a common misunderstanding. I get that still at the college level about that, where, in the encryption course. But then I tell them about, hey, look, somebody can Trojanize it and they got the site, they can, they're going to change the hash without a doubt. So, but thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other ones? Is that it? No, we're good.
As of right now, I think you're good. So
okay, so I'm going to hand it over to you, Alex. Alex, I'm handing it over to you. Okay.
Okay. I'm hoping you can still. Now you can.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay.
If I miss something, or if you could add something.
I'll chime in.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So I'm actually one of those college kids where I get the VMware Fusion provided to me from university. So on my Windows-based computer, I do use VirtualBox. But however, since I'm given the opportunity to use the software for free, I took advantage of that, and I've got the VM Fusion installed. Just 1 second, I need to make sure I can share the screen.
Is it working for you? Do I have to give you any access? I'm pretty sure I have to give you access.
So I might have to rejoin the meeting really quick because it was like the privacy permission needs to be like unlocked for the Zoom. I haven't had a chance to do that. Just 1 second, I'll be back.
Sure.
Let's see.
David, do you want me to personally chat you the emails I've gathered of people that need the
Yeah,
VM? Or
sure. Just if you could just forward that to me to my email address, that'd be great.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. You know, I got to warn you, my VM wasn't working well. So Alex, I may ask you to share your VM. We'll talk about that, you know, export it as a appliance to create an OVA. If yours is working and mine is not, I don't want to share mine.
Okay, so yeah, I got the Kali loaded. Can everyone see the screen
Yes,
of
I see
Kali?
it.
All right, cool. All right, so yeah, I'm using my laptop for that. I've got the Mac for that, and since VirtualBox gave me some issues in the beginning, I was using the VM, and I'm able to play. So for the lab that you're going to do, I was provided files, one of them being the hashed password that will be in my home directory. It's called the hashcat hashes. So that is essentially gibberish at the moment, but that's a hashed password. So I'm using the Kali distro. So I have the Wordlists Rocky U that we mentioned in the presentation downloaded already in my system. So I'm going to be using that word list to essentially turn this gibberish into an actual password. Using Kali or a lot of things in Linux are actually done to the terminal, which on the distro here, I have it handy. It's like right there. So what one would do the first, they would install the hashcat unless they already have it installed on their system. So one would do it by simply typing sudo, also making sure that you're using the root account, which I am on default in the Kali edition. So it would be sudo dnf install hashcat. So that command would install hashcat. It will download all the files, and then you would just confirm the download with yes, or if you don't need it, or I mean, I think I can actually test it.
Let me chime in. No, don't. You know, it won't work. Alex, I know you're used to using Fedora. Don't forget, we're on a Debian-based system here. So that would be the command if you're on a Red Hat-based system like Fedora. Yeah. So it won't work.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Since yep, makes sense. And then one can verify. I mean, that one is one of the steps in the lab would be to verify that the hashcat installed. One can do cd, that being looking inside a directory, cd, and there'll be user bin. We would go in here first, and then we would do ls/l h.
Good questions, rather than just answer them as one-offs. I think they're really good examples. So one thing everyone will remember is when we were on this main page originally, we went in and we viewed the page source. We scrolled down and scrolled down, and we saw this bunch of
I think the audio just cut off.
I know somebody was talking, but I lost sound, just letting you know. I didn't hear anything.
Right. And does
Somebody started.
everyone have access to the VM before we get too deeply into the?
No, we're going to, we need to do this. We're going to distribute the VM later.
Okay. Sounds
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, because there were some problems with the VM, so I couldn't upload it in advance.
Okay.
All right. So let's just, since we are a little bit time limited, we'll just move on to the lab where we can see. So we need to launch the hashcat. Launching the hashcat can be done with just simply typing hashcat//h. And then as one can see, we're given many options. Let me actually see if I can make this screen bigger. Actually, let's see if, okay. I think that'll be better for our lab. Okay, so then you get a menu with the options. So that once you guys get a chance to download the lab, you can explore these in more detail. I'm just going to show how you're going to crack that password using hashcat.
I don't know if you saw real quick, those hash modes that you saw, those are all the hashing algorithms hashcat supports. So it can crack anything from passwords. You saw password managers for full disk encryption, for protocols like Kerberos. I mean, really, this is one of the great things about hashcat. Now, I know I've been touting its speed, but to be a good password cracker, you've got to be able to support lots of different hashing algorithms. Yeah. So you see raw hash, that means that it's not salted in any way, but you'll see MD4, MD5, and so on. Thank you, Alex. I'm sorry to chime in there, but there's lots of hashing algorithms that you need to know, which is great. Also, and like I said, and limited to also full disk encryption, which I think is awesome. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. And then so essentially each, when you're trying to use this particular algorithm, so each algorithm has its own ID number essentially. And then when you need to, as mentioned, so I think for our purpose, we'll be using SHA-256. So one would type.
No, we're not going to. I think in the class it's MD5. I made it easy. It's MD5 hashed.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, because yeah, it says the -am1400.
Huh? The file I gave you should have been MD5. So
okay,
what Alex is saying here is
that was just an example.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So then.
So in other words, what he's saying is that when you enter the command, it's that number on the left column that you're going to enter. So you have to look up what the hashing algorithm is. You believe the dump is hashed in, and then you find its number, and that's the number that you enter into the command itself.
All right, cool. So we mentioned the word lists earlier. So one can make sure that he's got the word lists installed by simply typing the locate command, and then example dictionary, and then it will present me with the path to the dictionaries that I already have pre-installed with the Kali. So after that, with the password. All right, we'll go to the hashcat /v and then /
Alex, I'm having trouble seeing the bottom of the screen.
Okay, yes.
Maybe you can just move up the screen up a bit.
Be better.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yep.
I'm gonna do it this way. All right, does this look better to everyone?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. All right.
So what are you doing now, Alex, with that B option?
So with that command, with the B, so what's it called?
The benchmark, right?
Yes.
B for benchmark, yeah.
So we started the benchmarking mode. Yep, making sure everything's working.
Yeah, and that's what you're doing. Just to make sure everything's working, you don't get any error messages with this. However,
Mhm.
this could take a while depending on your system. I'll
Mhm.
tell you right now, running hashcat on a VM is not ideal. In one place that I teach, I do it directly on a Linux computer where Linux is installed in hardware. It works much better than doing it in a VM, because you got to remember, in the VM, it's virtualizing your processor and your memory. So sometimes you will run into problems. Now, I don't know how it is, JR, maybe, I don't know how it is on this in the cyber range, but I know working with it on VirtualBox sometimes is a problem, like the problems that I ran into recently. Now, sometimes I tend to increase the processor in my of my computer when I'm running this. I usually try to give it the VM as much memory as possible, and then give it as much processor as possible, because cracking is processor intensive. So just warn. So if you could do this in a VM, it's a little more challenging. It can be done, but it's a little more
Yeah,
challenging.
I've just I've done it prior. I was just wanted to show the process that one would do.
No, this is perfect. Perfect. Because you do the same thing. Let's make sure everything's working. And typically what I have found, if you get an error message when you do the B option for the benchmark, you're not going to be able to crack anything. So this is a good way of confirming that it's going to work. Otherwise, you'll be wasting your time. And by the way, in the lab that I'll distribute this afternoon, all this will be explained also. Okay? And right now, this lab I'll distribute that you can use for your students is how many pages? Like 14 pages long. Involves a lot of explanations and not just the steps, but I think you'll find it useful in your classroom. And once again, I'll distribute it in docx format so that you can edit it, use it, however you want. It's yours to use. Same thing with the presentation. Take the slides, use them however you want, edit them. And of course, if you have questions, you can email me. Look at that, it'll even decrypt Bitcoin and Litecoin.
All right, here we go. So
Done.
it took what, over, 2 minutes, almost 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It wasn't too bad. So after that, so we already have the hashcat hashes. That was the password that was hashed already placed in the home directory. So you're gonna run the cat command on that file. So once I do that, wait, sorry, hashcat hashes. All right, so as you can, it's not an actual password right now. So what we're gonna do after that, we're gonna locate the word lists that we have pre-installed with Kali. So word lists, and here we have a whole list of lists that we're given with Kali, and we're going to be using this specific one, Rocky U. And it's important, based on the word list that you're going to be using. In our example, we will be using the Rocky U. It has a path to that word list. So sometimes, if you're doing this all the time, you might know the path automatically, but it's important to write down the path since it will be used. Okay, and then after that, Rocky. All right, and so the file is currently compressed, but I already pre-done the lab, so I decompressed the file, so I'm not going to be running this next step. However, if somebody's doing this lab for the first time, they will have to run this command. They will type in cd, and it's important to note where, what is it called? Where's that Rocky U file? So you would type cd, meaning look inside that directory, and then you would type in this path. So it'd be cd/user /share, and then word lists. Oops. All right, cool. And then we can see inside the directory, and then we can list what's inside the directory by typing ls. And then we can see that I already have Rocky utxt decompressed. So after that, we can, what's it called? Where is it? We can view the contents of that file. So we can type in the command. Actually, we will do cd. Actually, wait, less txt. All right. And so we get a whole list of passwords that are inside this list, as one can see. And then once we're done looking, we can just press Q, and then we're back. And we can do this. So now once we have the word list decompressed, we can use that word list to launch a brute force attack using on a hashes file using that word list. And that can be done with this command that one can later see once Professor Vargas will upload the lab for everyone to see. So and it is a long command. So with Linux, it is important to pay attention to what you type, because if you make one simple space error, you miss a character, the code will not work, and it's not going to try to correct you. So you should be always, check yourself when you're executing commands such as this one.
And while you're typing that, let me just add one thing. The -A0, that's the attack mode, okay? So right now we're telling hashcat that this is a dictionary attack, but if you want to go to a brute force, you would basically change that -A option. If you wanted to do a hybrid, you would change that -A option, okay? Like I said, we're only gonna cover the dictionary attack because of time constraints, but just be aware that that's really where you tell it what the mode is gonna be. Otherwise, the entire syntax is going to be exactly the same as this.
All right, and before I enter the command, I did want everyone to take a look at it and examine. And yes, you mentioned that, Professor Marcus, that we're essentially telling the hashcat to launch an attack on this file using word list rocku. So, and then by force, essentially, that's just telling hashcat to launch the brute force attack on it. So I'm just going to simply type enter. And then, all right, so that means we have decrypted the password. And then, so once the command has been ran, we can do the cat command, and then we'll do cat cracked passwords swords.txt. All right. And essentially all that gibberish before turned into password hello, my secret password.
So you see, so that this is the dictionary attack. And the reason this was quick and it worked is because all these passwords, which are after the colon, were located, these words were located in the rocku.txt file. However, you'll notice in the lab, you can't see it now, but there were 2 passwords that were not cracked. And the reason they were not cracked was because they weren't in that word list file. So if we want to crack those, then we have to do a brute force. Okay. This was just a dictionary attack. And it's as simple as that.
All right. And I think one other item we have we can perform, we can also crack a single hash being at the terminal, and then so I think this being the first hash that we decrypted, it stands for the password. You can just essentially try to perform a brute force attack on that specific hash. And to do that, you would do another long command. But before that, we actually have to go inside the user bin directory. And then we would do that cd user bin. All right, once we're in there, we know the hashcat is installed in that directory. So we'd go /am 0. So it's similar to what we typed earlier, but now we're just going to type in this hash. Oops. Let me see. Okay, no, it's not going to do it like that.
Just hit the up arrows, right? You don't have to repeat.
No, for some other reason, I
It's not working
guess
on
it
you?
didn't. Yeah, it didn't finish. Okay, and then no. Okay, I was just, I was trying to copy paste that whole.
Go to upstairs. Can you go to edit, like highlight it and go to edit copy on top? Callie, yeah. Just highlight it and do an edit copy. Edit copy. Yeah, there you go.
Oh yeah, it
Right
was
there and do an edit paste there. Yeah.
Once I do that, yep, space and then edit, paste. Yep, cool.
Mhm.
And then user share. Okay, so that would be space cat data example. Examples.
So this is another one of the other dictionaries that comes with Kali. Example dictionary.
I'm just double checking what I typed really quick, so to make sure everything goes through. Cat slash data slash example dictionary. Cool. And then here we go. It just shows us essentially when we used, that was a, okay, so that text file contained several passwords as was mentioned earlier. And instead of using that word list and decrypting the whole text file, we just took one separate hash from it and then used the same command to just decrypt one specific hash. And then here we go, it tells us exactly what that hash represents. All right. I think, then the last part of the lab, I don't know if that was an important part, David.
It's all important.
Okay. We've missed views. Okay, then let me, then we'll do, oops. Cool. CD. And then we'll do list /all. And from here, what we're going to do, we're going to look inside the actual hashcat program, where we would do cd.hashcat. And then once we're in there, we will do hashcat. We will cat the hashcat profile, pod file, I meant to say. All right. And that's essentially, that's what we have just encrypted. It's already essentially now hashcat recognizes this hash and what that stands for.
So essentially, remember what the pod file does, that once it's able to determine a password that matches a password hash, it saves it to this file. So this will grow the more you use it, so that it doesn't have to try to crack it again. It'll look here first, and it'll say, oh, I've seen this hash before. It's almost like it's a rainbow table, okay? And then it'll give you the password. So once again, every time you crack something, it's going to be added to this hashcat pot file to make subsequent cracks faster. It's like, why do it again? I've already done it. In other words, that's the thinking of hashcat.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's memory.
Yeah, exactly. So cool. I think that's it, right?
Yes.
Alex?
Yep.
So that's the end of our presentation.